Hello, everybody. What a great film. I do mean that, seriously.
Thank you.
Let me start out. You know, I watched the film today, and I want to first pay tribute to all of you for the role that you play in this important, it's really a pathogen, you know, that's hit so many people. And I've been thinking a lot about Alzheimer's and what's happening, what's unfolding, the costs that are ahead. And it's staggering. Let me just ask all of you for a second, how many of you have a personal connection one way or another to Alzheimer's? Huge, huge numbers. Tribute to all of you for keeping this going and being here tonight. I guess the thing that struck me was the very first frame. I just loved it. Edison, right? Yeah. I have not failed, just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And there was an enthusiasm in that line that as somber as the end of this film felt, my staff said, Steve, do not be your normal, joking, you know, up self. But is there an upness in what Edison was telling us that in the process, in this path, the difficulty and the challenges, that there is actually something positive from this? Are you willing to do 10,000 more films?
Well, you know, when I started doing this work in Alzheimer's, it actually came about through a guy who was very funny. And the only way that I could really stick with it, this is a film called Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me. Glenn had this marvelous sense of humor, and I said, so I was generally talking very frankly with him at all times. I said, so tell me about your Alzheimer's. And he says, I don't got no Alzheimer's, I got part-timers. So I think you should make it funny, because I think we all have a destiny towards death, and we want to make the ride as positive and as wonderful as possible. And Alzheimer's is not one of those rides that we want to take. But that said, the scientists that I met and the people that I'm working with, Phyllis and Nancy Lynn and this, you know, Eric Seamers, and you, Dr. Host, when you talked about your mom is going to teach me something, that's humor. That's humor. There's lightness and levity. We've got to have levity in what we do, and yet at the same time we have to take it seriously. We have to do our best. But remember along the way that it's all a process of as Neil says, we stand on the shoulders of everyone. And so, you know, we gotta find the lightness. We gotta find the light.
So I know you're a storyteller, and I want to get to our experts in a minute. And I thank you for mentioning the Glen Campbell film, which I saw and was so moved. One of my first days at UCLA in 1980, we went on a field trip, and I think it was either Coldwater Canyon or Laurel Canyon. I can't where he lived, but we went by, and he just happened to be there, and he dragged the entire class of freshman students into his place, and kind of blew us away. It was my first celebrity. You may all remember that. And it was a kind of an amazing thing. And then to see his story, to see his humor, to see what you told was so amazing. But as a storyteller and as someone who may approach this, one of the interesting things I'm interested in Alzheimer's, and I'm interested in a lot of the things we have to deal with in a society, are there bank shots out there that we haven't thought of? Is your deep dive into Alzheimer's given you as I think a non-scientist, but as an observer, any insights into bank shots that you think are promising?
Well, I think film is very important to telling the story. I think getting people involved in clinical trials. I think having people aware of other people's situation. My dad always said to me the one thing he abhorred was indifference and apathy of the plight of others. And I think that so many of us, you know, say, well, until it hits us, it's their problem. And what we have to do with this is make it our problem. So the deep dive for me was, I made this movie called Walk the Line, and that led me to Glen Campbell. And I had no idea that I was going to do anything to do with Alzheimer's. And when the producer came to me and said, would you do this and do the concerts, he said, Glen has Alzheimer's. I didn't want to do it because he had Alzheimer's, because it seemed dark. And then I met Glen, like I said, he had a wonderful sense of humor. But what it took me on was I got to see up close and very personal the journey of these, of the family, the caregivers, the scientists, all of you folks that are involved in the pharmaceutical process, the stuff that happens in Washington, D.C., the journey of the scientists. And I don't think too many people know about it. And so for me as a filmmaker, I want to tell those stories,
Right.
instead of just blowing stuff up.
Richard, I know you live in like the great castle of advanced science in the world. You see the future, you see what's going on. I'm just interested in who your enemies are in achieving success.
I think the only enemy is really the challenge and complexity of the problem that we face. I'm just so happy to be able to say, in all honesty, that there are no opposing sides, I think, in this battle, at a time when the politics of the country and the world are complex. Over the years when things have evolved, it's been a remarkable and gratifying constant that bipartisan, bicameral support, global support for the mission and the purpose of biomedical research in general, but very specifically for Alzheimer's disease, has been embraced by all.
But not to interrupt you, but I'm going to interrupt you. My reading is that bipartisan or not, the amount of resources that have gone into this are pathetic compared to the scale of the challenge. So I want to give you a chance right now to just take off your NIH hat, and just let go. Who's to blame?
If your statements might have been more true a few years ago than they are now.
I'm typically outdated.
Clearly, all is relative, and additional funding would purchase even more ability to attack problems than they are now. But understand the scope at a time when the national budget and priorities have come under such demand, scrutiny, and competition. The budgets for NIH, biomedical research fund in general, have gone up something like 30% in the last 3 or 4 years. Alzheimer's funding has nearly tripled. This is just extraordinary, and it's by consensus. But
is tripled from low enough? I mean, not to say, in this film, George Vredenberg appears, and George Vredenberg talks about the second inconvenient truth, the cost that will come on, the cost of Alzheimer's to society rising, at least to the government, to the level of the defense budget today. So I don't want to press you too hard on this, but I'm just wondering, don't you need a lot more research? You sound happy with what you've got.
I'm happy with the trends and progress, but just to point to one of the opportunities, in fact, obligations we've had, legislation was passed which not only allowed but required those of us at NIH every year to submit a so-called bypass budget, professional judgment budget. So every year for the last 3 years, now going to the 4th year, we tell Congress directly, doesn't get to be modified by the President, by the Department of Health and Human Services, straight to Congress, how much funding in the opinion of experts is needed above the current level to proceed at maximal pace, given scientific opportunities, towards ultimately a cure. And year after year, for these 3 and 4 years, Congress has actually increased the budget and allocation for NIH research on Alzheimer's by fully the amount that's been requested. And this is a process that I think has been thoughtful. We don't presume that there isn't enough money. We just ask for all that's needed to move pace by pace to the steps we think are necessary towards a cure.
So, Heather, I'm going to cut you off here for a second just because I need to test Richard on one of your tweets. So I become a fan of Heather's tweets here. And she, on July 25th, she writes, "For the first time, a large randomized clinical trial has demonstrated significant reduction in the risk for developing mild cognitive impairment and dementia through treatment of high blood pressure." Now, I don't understand a lot of that, but it sounds like a bank shot to me. It sounds like somebody through a bank blood pressure path may have found a connection that we may not. So I'm just interested, as you in the science in NIH, do you find Heather's tweet reflective of a reality that's promising, or do you find this wishful thinking? This is in my foreign policy area. Is this Wilson aspirational, what the world wants to be, or is this Nixon, the world as it is?
No, I think it's absolutely promising, and I think you got a sense from the scientists who were speaking here that although amyloid and tau are very important targets, there is a sense that there are many factors that contribute to what goes on in the brain, what goes wrong in the brain in Alzheimer's disease. And risk factors like hypertension have long been appreciated to be a part of it, but not yet until now has there been a direct demonstration in a randomized controlled clinical trial that if you lower blood pressure more effectively, it actually makes a difference. And we haven't seen the primary data, so I have to emphasize this is a preliminary report, but that preliminary report is extraordinarily promising, indicating there are some things we can tell people they can and should do now that will on the population as a whole, make a statistical important effect in reducing their risk of having progression to Alzheimer's. So it's promising, to be sure.
So Heather, you fund, you research, you see what's coming together in ways that I think many stakeholders in this conversation don't. You wrote about this, but I'm just interested in, you know, one of the really fascinating pieces about this film, which we saw, is it was a play of essentially darkness and light. It was hope and despair. It was, you know, rationality and faith. It was, you know, kind of, I mean, there are a lot of things in this film that are so deep. And so, again, I know that you sit in a place where you have fingers in so many pots. What, so tell us what you're realistically, you know, think is going on, and then do us the favor of tell us what the wacky things are that you think might be possible.
So I think for your first question in terms of where we are, and I think the film did an amazing job of really showcasing this, and at the end, the message of that you stand on the shoulders of giants and really of everyone is really true. We learn something from every trial that goes forward. The findings from that trial help us do the next study even better and move us one step closer in that direction. But the tweet that you mentioned is another study, is a completely other direction, looking at the problem in a different way. And we need to do that from lots of different lenses. So whether it's the amyloid or the tau, whether it's looking at the linkage to our hearts, to our cardiovascular health. Inflammation was mentioned in the video, in the movie as well. The mitochondria, the energy, the powerhouse, and do all of that across the board. And the Alzheimer's is complex. It's a complex disease. Our brains are complex. The likelihood is it's going to be multiple of those factors depending on where someone is in the disease. And also with lifestyle.
So let me ask you the same question. You know, I pushed Richard on. And just in Chicago the other day, we were talking about Alzheimer's with a big panel of experts, and I was so moved. We had, I don't know if any of you are facing this, there's so many people in the room, an amazing woman who is taking care of her mom. There's been a film, Daisy Duarte, who told me the story of her mother, Sonia, how she and generations of people in her family had died from Alzheimer's, and that she herself has the genetic variants that matter in this, and has been told that she will develop this. It's very powerful on a human level. But part of this is, and you saw this in the film, a tension between resources, research, and looking at the model of what's happened with cancer, what's happened with other big diseases, that if only the same amount of resources had gone into this, that the deliverables might be a very different scale. And I'm just, you know, Richard seemed to intimate, I don't want to put words in his mouth, that we're largely okay right now. In Chicago, if we had said that, I think we would have had a protest in the streets. And that there's an anger and a frustration out there that the resources that have gone in have been limited, not where they were to be. So from your perspective and your perch, do you want to have a conversation with Richard?
Well, I think what I would agree with is that if you look in the last, really since the national plan that Richard mentioned,
I like the disagree part,
was passed in 2012, we've quadrupled the NIH funding. Yeah. We are not where we need to be. I would agree with that. I think all of us would agree with that. We are nowhere near where we need to be. We need to continue to double down on those investments. It's a complex disease. The biology is complex. We need to understand that, develop the technologies that allow us to understand that, and then see it in living people. But we're going in the right direction as where we need to go. And I'd also say that there's a currently $425 million that's pending in Washington, D.C. right now. So again, continuing in that forward direction in the momentum that we need to, all of us need to raise our voices and be a part of that conversation.
Sorry to disappoint, but I don't think we disagree.
I know, I do my best.
But what is important is that the pace and trend of increased resources is happening at a very gratifying pace, and should it continue at this pace, I think we are addressing the continually expanding needs and capacity of the research community to do the right kind of research. One other message with the group here and what came across here, I'd like to note, in addition to the importance, the critical importance of funds, two other variables. We need to be recruiting people, scientists, and participants in studies, and to take those two separately.
So scientists, and so I've heard a lot about clinical trials, so take me down the scientists.
So, you know, with the expansion and the necessary expansion we have in research, we can certainly fund more extensively scientists already working in the field, But whether it's physicists for inspiration or people from other fields of biomedical research, we need to recruit the best and the brightest new people into attacking the problem of Alzheimer's and related dementias as well.
So say a little more, 'cause I love this, what you just said. You're back on my good list. There used to be a guy named Tom Kalil, who I don't know if some of you knew him, in the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House, and he's, I think he's at UC Berkeley now, I may be wrong. But he said, we make a big mistake in understanding how science progresses. That science, whatever, X target you may want, may depend on advances in mathematics or informatics or microprocessing capacity or things that or physics or may be unrelated. And so I'm just interested in the sort of state of the field. When you're at NIH and you're looking, Joe Biden in the cancer area, and I don't know if he's right, time will tell, part of what he's been trying to do, and I've followed it for some time, is to try to de-silo the cancer research game. So you've got researchers and oncologists and people in information processing. Does Alzheimer's need a de-siloing process or not? Richard?
I think, honestly, that the level of collaboration, interaction among scientists and disciplines in Alzheimer's research is really exemplary. But I think that we need more people in more fields of research to come and join that enterprise. So gratifyingly, the last fiscal or budget year, for example, and all the awards we gave in this era of expanded research, 39% were to people who had never before even applied for research in Alzheimer's disease. This year, we extended a program to supplement the work of people at all of the other institutes, other than the Aging Institute at NIH, who were doing research that was not itself Alzheimer's research, but where they wanted to make a proposal for how they could take their approach to science and biology and make it relevant to Alzheimer's. And we will be supplementing hundreds of new sciences this year, which we hope will accelerate the pace of attacking all of these problems. And the other recruitment we mentioned, of course, and you alluded to, is for participants in studies. For a lot of the clinical research, point not made often enough, the pace at which we can engage people in a trial and come to answers depends and is often limited by recruiting people into those studies.
Heather, James?
Yeah, just two things that I'd add to Richard's comment, and one is we completely agree. And about 4 years ago, the Alzheimer's Association started a program that was really to attract new to the field. So the idea being that people had never published or been funded in any neurodegenerative space, so Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease. And interestingly, we're seeing an insurgence, a number of people coming from the oncology space, coming from the information sciences, rheumatology, and looking in those sectors that are saying, here's the biology that I've investigated over here, and I want to apply it, and this is how I'm going to do that. And so we've really seen that continue to grow. The other thing I'd add, and I think this is also a priority of NIH's, is not just do we need to increase the number of scientists, but we also need to increase the diversity of the perspectives of the science and really promote diversity within the sector and within the field as well.
James?
Yes. Two things. One, the goal of the film, one of the goals of the film, and we're partnering with folks like Bright Focus and the Gates Group to make sure that this film is seen in universities.
And the Gates Group is a brand new announcement today, right? Or did you know for a long time and you just kept it a secret?
No, I've known for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just learned today. So Bill Gates is going to help support your distribution and communications efforts.
Yes, because they specifically want to make sure that clinical trials get going. And I think that one of the reasons that we made the film is so that we can recruit more scientists. Now, Neil Tyson, in his interview, said he believed that we need to get to like a Manhattan Project or what they did in Colorado, where they bring in the brightest minds from every field.
Kind of New Mexico, but that's okay.
Well, whatever. I don't, I wasn't around for that. Okay. Maybe you were. But anyway, he was talking about... Yeah, okay. You said comedy, didn't you? Okay, all right. Anyway, but it was so profound, actually. He was saying that to bring all the great minds together from many different fields might be a way of, looking at this thing in a different way. I have a feeling in interviewing so many young scientists that they're going to turn the technology, they're going to look at it, it's going to go just like that, and they're going to go, there it is. And that's why we need to have as many people as possible involved in this journey. And in terms of money, the one thing I kept asking the same question. And it seemed to me that this disease, for so long, and doctor, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I probably am, but this is just my idea, was there's no cure for it. So to invest in something that there is no cure or no sign of a cure is a real tough thing to do for people that are allocating funds. If there is one thing that sets this thing on the right course, if there's one affirmation that we're on the right track, I think the money's going to really start coming in. And I think that that's the hope. And so I do think there's a lot of hope that's happening, and it's great that you guys are giving more money, and in the face of not having any evidence that things are successful.
You know, one of the things, I want to go to all of you in just a second, and I appreciate your patience with this chat. It's been so interesting. I have a privilege of walking through a lot of communities in America and not always talking about healthcare, talking about foreign policy or economic stuff or environmental issues. And you get to know the people who come to events. And they come talk to you, they want to know the Atlantic or have some connection. And it is amazing to me over the last decade how often the subject of Alzheimer's and or dementia comes up, of caring for people, the home care, folks that are just doing this, and I really pay tribute. And as I look at this question, there was a quote, and I have to apologize, I don't know where it came from. And by studying up on the Chicago event, somebody won €1 million contest, a scientific group recently in the Alzheimer's area. And I read a clip of the speech where the person said, look, we are nearer than people think to something that may make this issue a non-issue in 10 years. When I look at the staggering costs of what lies ahead, and I look at the bravado of what was said in that prize ceremony, I asked George Vredenberg, I said, where are we? Because you're scaring us all. Do we need to be scared to get there? Or does science have a rabbit up its sleeve, and this will disappear, and we will put ourselves out of business talking about this? Will AI, artificial intelligence, help give us a scale of dealing with this that we don't see or can't even think about today, where that scientist might be right? And so just before I go to the audience, I'd love to get a snapshot in a scale of 1 to 10. On in 10 years, are we going to be talking about this, or are we still going to be struggling through with your film, which was so powerful, but it's going to be a bigger uphill battle? So what do you think, James?
Well,
scale of 1 to 10, give us a number, and then you can say a sentence.
I think we're looking at least an 8.
8.
The optimism.
8 is tough.
8 is. I'd like to go 8 to 10. I'd like to say 10, but I'm an optimist, and the people like Randy Bateman, the doctors that I interviewed, these guys go to work every day with the attitude is, we are not going to give up until we get there. As John Licklider said, he said, this is our destiny. And when you have guys as smart and as powerful as that, saying that, and if we can go to the moon, we can beat this. I just don't know when it's going to happen, but I'm very optimistic based upon the commitment of the people that are involved in it.
Heather, are you going to have this job 10 years from now, or be looking for something new?
I'm also an optimist, and I would probably say a 7-8, but with a few caveats. And the caveats would be that we continue to increase our investments in research to understand this disease and to get to the place of having treatments, whether it's a single treatment combination, and looking across the entire spectrum of the disease. So really, before someone is even having the memory changes, all the way through.
Richard?
No number.
Dude, you live by numbers.
No number.
And probabilities.
I think that the pace of progress, the hope is better than it's ever been. I know we're going to get there. I know we'll get there faster if we work harder and invest more and bring more people into the fold. That certainty is enough to drive the statistic that matters to me.
Fascinating. Let me open to all of you. Can we open? Do we have time for questions, folks? We have people out there? We can't see any of you up here. I see semi-hands and shadows, and there's in the back and the middle. I can't tell anything more about you but a silhouette. So please tell us who you are.
My name's Margarita. Hi. I have actually worked at the NIH for about 25 years.
Did you work with Richard?
I saw him in the hallway.
Yeah?
I did. We worked on the same
Scale of 1 to 10, how was Richard?
Oh, he's a 10. He is. No, all the scientists. I am not a scientist, but I worked with a scientist. I was in education. And you kept on saying, invest. And I totally agree with this, but can I point to investing in our youth? To make sure that our youth, that the STEM works, that our youth are encouraged to go into research, to go set. So that's what I would hope.
Okay, any comment on are the incentives right for more people to go into, I'm going to board broadly, but more, you were talking, Richard, about getting more people. Are the incentives right to either generationally, but also in other sectors to get into this field?
Yeah, I think this has been one of the most exciting things that's happened in the past few years, that the level of excitement, enthusiasm, and the perceived promise of the opportunity in research has really turned around. I think a few years ago we were at a real crisis. The success rate for people applying for research was low. The best and brightest people were not going into biomedical research, and I think these past years of constant increases in funding have made visible and objective important difference in bringing people into the field. Now, I hope this goes all the way through to STEM education, all through the grade schools and on up, because we need to promote that. But at least right now, the decisions being made by people on the verge of career choices are more towards biomedical research and specifically around and inclusive of Alzheimer's and dementia than they've been in past years.
Are you guys paid more? I mean, I'm interested in the fact, I mean, this, just not to belabor the point, but I've always learned if you want something, you can, if you want to negotiate for it, if you want to pay for it. This film is about hope. This film is about movement. But I'm interested in, if we really wanted as a society to win this battle for the world, and to Margarita's question, should we be doubling the price of what people are paid to go into this profession? Should we be doing something more dramatic? If you want a Manhattan Project, shouldn't you be putting a marker down that is bolder than what we're doing today? I mean, I don't mean to be obnoxious, but the question is, I've always learned, if you really want to, when Pete Domenici was a senator and wanted to do it, he put a marker out there, got Obama and other people to jump in about, throwing money at a level and pace that hadn't happened before. Does something more dramatic than what has happened with Alzheimer's had any boat? We'll get back to you later, but just the two of you real quick.
I mean, I would say if watching the film and you meet scientists and researchers and clinicians all around the world, many have been personally affected by this disease, and that's driving their passion, that's driving them forward. And just by the sheer numbers today, many of the youth, this is their reality. I have 2 young children. They spent their weekend with their great-grandmother who has Alzheimer's. They took her water. They sat with her and watched TV. This is their reality.
Mm-hmm. Richard?
If the question is whether we need to financially motivate people to go into the field, I think that's maybe the least important issue. I think what is important is that people feel that there is a societal commitment to providing the opportunity to carry out that research. I think those of us in the field feel we are gifted and privileged to have an opportunity to do it.
This gentleman right here. And this will go to you first, Dave. Did Eli Lilly not let you do anything, or did you have free reign?
They didn't give me any drugs.
No, that's a start. But did you
comedy,
have any?
Remember?
Did you have free reign in what you want to do, or did they?
They were great. They were fantastic, and they were very trusting of me. And I had to sign my life away. They were very careful that and I was too. But
so their big-time cancer drug, you couldn't tell us how great it is.
No, I couldn't. But I can tell you this: that the people at that company are the real deal. The people that I worked with were the best people. I've been in the entertainment business for years, and I can tell you that no studio is as well run as that company, and their executives are really top-notch.
I somehow believe you. Yes, right here.
So, my name is Ian Kramer. I'm executive director of the LEAD Coalition.
Can you be a little bit?
Sure. So your question about enemies, we have enemies, and number one, of course, is the disease itself. But if you get under that layer, the enemies are complacency, stigma, and surrender.
Right.
And no one on this stage is doing it. And people like Glen Campbell, he isn't doing it. Daisy Duarte isn't doing it.
Right.
They're helping overcome stigma and complacency and surrender. And what we need is more people like that. So what you have in the scientific community and what you have in Congress and what you have in the advocacy community and what you have in the self-advocacy community, people like Daisy and the people in the film who are speaking first person, living with the disease as fully as they can, and as empowered as they can, is saying, I'm going to tell my story through James's film and neighbor to neighbor and the person behind me in the grocery store line, and I'm going to reveal, coming out of the shadows, encouraging people like me and others to be in clinical studies, to advocate for more funding so that Richard and Heather and others can advance the science more quickly. So what we need are optimistic, hopeful, perseverant warriors who don't stop, who don't allow the setback of one study not meeting its endpoints to deter them from the next step. So we have that in the film, we have it on the stage, we have it all around us, and we all have an opportunity to be those optimistic, determined, relentless warriors and tell our stories and demand more resources, more change, more clinical
Powerful
trials,
statement. Tell us what your association is again, because we didn't hear it.
Leaders Engaged on Alzheimer's Disease, the lead.
So thank you so much for this. And I'll say that when we were in Chicago and I asked the CEOs of African Americans Against Alzheimer's and Women Against Alzheimer's, they both responded exactly the same way. They said complacency in Congress is one of our top enemies.
One of the things I wanted to say that Nancy Lynn and Mark Cohen are here with the film, and what we want to do with the film, on your table there are two cards, one that looks like this and the other which is our talking points. And if you would like to get involved, have a screening, and just get involved with us in promoting the film, that would really be helpful. Because, Ian, what we want to do is make sure that we carry the message. That's what we hope the film's going to do, is carry the message and create conversations and communities.
How does one promote the film? Is it a thing you can watch on Netflix? Is it on Vimeo?
When we did Glen Campbell, we had groups. We had groups like the Alzheimer's Association, and they'd have screenings, and then there would be conversations like this. Or Leading Age, there was 400, and Volunteers of America, they have groups all over the country, and there was 450 screenings, doing it at universities, doing it at nursing colleges, then putting it on CNN, putting it on PBS, then on Netflix, and then just keep the conversations going and have folks like Dr. Hodes go out and talk, help us in Washington, have some of the policymakers, and then they want to take it to their communities. It's a community effort. We're going to beat this thing as a country. I asked former President Clinton, when we interviewed him for Glen Campbell, I had this crazy idea. I said, what if I told you that 5 million people were going to die from an attack? What would you do as the president? He went into how much money we needed to solve Alzheimer's, but that's how I think about it. We're going to lose so many people, and it's going to cost our country trillions of dollars. A lot of the politicians say it's going to break our economy. The only way to stop this is to make this a community problem, not Democrats, not Republicans, not it's all of us. And so that's why I'm asking you to help us if you can, and that's why I made the film. This is not for money, I can guarantee you, but. I get to a certain point in your life where you go, what am I going to leave behind? I'm going to leave behind whatever I can, and that's to help everybody.
We're going to take one last question from down here because you scare me. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you do, and in a good way. Like, I didn't want to end this without your question. So this is the last one. So make it really great.
I will do my very best. My name is Sean Taylor, and I am president of Veterans Against Alzheimer's, which is a network.
Thank you for that.
Of Us Against Alzheimer's. And so my question is two-part. One is we talked about open science, the collaboration that is needed. And from what I'm hearing, there is a roadblock with that. We are still in our silos. We are still in our lanes. And I want to talk about a little bit further, how can we collaborate and also involve the military and involve the VA and the DOD with their research as well.
So just a quick question real fast. You do see it as a siloed community. I mean,
yes.
I think what's fascinating about this, because I love Richard's optimism and connection in this thing, and I trust you. But at the same time, I hear there's another narrative. In this field, there are narratives that sit right next to each other, where people have very different perspectives of what that. And you see a siloed world and different paths that needs more. And so, Richard, we're just gonna go quickly with this last question, but I just wonder, are you right or is she right?
Well, I wouldn't say that everything is absolute and perfect. What I would say is that there's an enormous collaboration, commitment to open science, meaning data are generated by scientists. Conditions of award, for example, for federal support, or those data are made available in public domains. The Alzheimer's Association and NIH work together to post the places in which those data come together. As Sean, we had a chance to talk about, and you know from experience, NIH works with the Department of Defense, with VA, to try to coordinate the efforts that we make. The advisory committee that supervises federal efforts around Alzheimer's has representation from all these federal agencies and meeting multiple times a year to work together at coordinating efforts. So, not perfect, but those silos are under more attack, I think, all the time.
Thank you. And Heather, as you finish with your last word, I'd like you to tell the audience, if they wanted to disproportionately affect this situation in a big spike of activity, what do you most need?
I'd say raise your voice, be a part of the conversation, which means talk to your legislators, talk to your physicians, talk to your neighbors, your friends, get them activated in the cause, whether that's any of the above or participating in a clinical trial. All of those things are, if we raise our voices, will get us there.
I'm going to give you the last word, Mr. Filmmaker. What do you most need and want to see besides people saying, see the film in the community, which I know is a really good thing, but...
Oh, I think it's not to be indifferent and apathetic to the plight of others. I think it's to really get involved locally, on a local level, with your Alzheimer's groups, and to write to your congressman, and to support, you know, and you know, a funny thing happened the other day. I was playing golf, and sitting next to me was this woman. She says, I'm scared, I don't know where he is. And this is a woman with Alzheimer's looking for her husband who'd just gone to the bathroom. And I think that what we need to do is we need to make people aware of just how this disease affects people. So it's watching films like this, it's going to community support, marches, and just, you know, it's really getting involved. You know, so often we're indifferent, you know, if it's not affecting my family, it's not affecting me. This is going to affect everybody. It is affecting everybody. That's right. All the people that raise their hand in this room. And I do believe that there's the silos. But the silos, I believe, are not necessarily congressional. I believe it's down to the individuals in our communities. If it's not affecting me and my family, so what? They don't have the perspective that it's going to affect them in a couple of years. And I think that the young people have got to get aware of this too, because it's going to be their problem. My kids are going to have to take care of me, I hope. So, anyway.
Well, James, I want to thank you so much for not pulling your punches in this film and having us see a window both into the heartbreak, both into the efforts of what's going on and, you know, the reality of what happens, but also giving us the humor and the laughter and life that is also part of the story. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, James Keach, The Turning Point, Heather Snyder, the Alzheimer's Association, Richard Hodes, the National Institute of Health. Thank you all very much. Thank you for laughing a little bit and for the tears, I'm sure, too.